Today, we're diving into one of the biggest challenges of our time, climate change. But we're going to look at it through the lens of one specific place, India. We're calling this one a planet's fever.
So, let's just start with a thought experiment. What if the Earth itself could get sick? What if, just like a person, it could actually run a fever?
Because honestly, that is the best way to wrap your head around what's happening. The planet isn't just getting a bit warmer. Its entire system, its body, is showing symptoms of being sick. And this idea, this analogy, is going to be our guide through this whole explainer.
All right, so just like with any illness, the very first step is getting a clear diagnosis. We need to figure out exactly what we're dealing with.
Now, this is where things get really clear, because we hear these two terms all the time. Global warming, that's the fever itself. It's the number on the thermometer going up. Simple. But climate change, well, that's all the other stuff. It's the whole range of symptoms caused by that fever, the chills, the aches, the fatigue. Getting this distinction right is absolutely crucial.
So what's causing this fever? Well, it all comes down to something called the enhanced greenhouse effect. Look, a normal greenhouse effect is a good thing. It's like a perfectly cozy blanket that keeps the Earth from freezing. But what we've done is pile on a bunch of extra, heavy, suffocating blankets by pumping out more greenhouse gases. Way too much heat is getting trapped, and that's what's making the fever spike.
And who are the main culprits behind this? Well, first you've got carbon dioxide, CO2. It's the big one, responsible for about 60% of the extra heat. But then there's methane, CH4. There's less of it, but wow, does it pack a punch. Each and every molecule of methane traps about 25 times more heat than a molecule of CO2. It's a real heavy hitter.
Okay, so we have the diagnosis. Now let's look at the symptoms. How is this planetary fever actually showing up all across the globe?
First up, and this one's a biggie, the seas are rising. It's not magic, it's just physics. When you heat up water, it expands. So as the oceans get warmer, they literally take up more space. Add in all the meltwater pouring in from glaciers, and you get this slow, steady rise that's putting coastlines everywhere in danger.
And it's not just a few glaciers here and there. The entire cryosphere, that's the fancy term for all the frozen stuff on Earth, is melting. From the Arctic sea ice to the massive ice sheets in Greenland, it's all in retreat. We're watching a global thaw happen in real time.
And believe it or not, it gets worse. The oceans have been our planet's great sponge, soaking up a huge chunk of that extra CO2. But there's a price. All that absorbed CO2 is changing the ocean's fundamental chemistry, making it more acidic. This is absolutely devastating for things like coral reefs and plankton, which are the very foundation of the entire marine food web.
And finally, all this extra heat and energy trapped in the system is basically supercharging our weather. It's like rocket fuel. It means more intense and more frequent heat waves, way heavier rainfall, and much more powerful storms. The predictable weather patterns we built our world around, yeah, they're becoming dangerously unreliable.
So those are the symptoms on a global scale. But now we're going to zoom in right in on one country where all these symptoms are becoming critically severe. India, a nation right on the front line.
So why India? What makes it so incredibly vulnerable? Well, it's kind of this perfect storm. You have a massive, dense population. You have an economy that is deeply, deeply tied to the climate. Think monsoon-fed farms and coastal fishing villages. And on top of that, you have widespread poverty, which means millions just don't have the resources to adapt when disaster strikes. That combination is a recipe for extreme risk.
And what you have to understand is that these problems don't just happen in a vacuum. They trigger a domino effect, a cascade of crises that stretches from the highest peaks of the Himalayas all the way down to the country's sprawling coasts.
Let's start with the most basic thing we all need, food. The rising heat is directly hurting major crops like wheat and maize. Some projections show that agricultural output could fall by 15% by the year 2050. Now think about that. For a nation that's a global breadbasket, this could mean flipping from a major food exporter to having to import food. That is a fundamental threat to its security.
Okay, now let's travel from the farmlands all the way up to the Himalayas. They call this region the third pole for a reason. It holds more ice than anywhere else on Earth outside of the Arctic and Antarctic. And just like those poles, it is melting. And it's melting fast.
And if you want to understand just how fast, look at this number. The Gangotri Glacier, which is a major source for the sacred river Ganga, is pulling back by about 28 meters every single year. That's not some slow geological process. That's happening right now, within a single generation.
And the result is this terrifying 1-2 punch. In the short term, all that extra meltwater has to go somewhere, so you get these catastrophic flash floods downstream. But in the long term, as the glaciers shrink and disappear, the flow of water into Asia's greatest rivers, the Ganga, the Indus, the Brahmaputra, starts to dry up, threatening the water supply for hundreds of millions of people.
Now let's go from the mountains all the way down to India's massive 7,500-kilometer coastline. Rising seas aren't some distant sci-fi threat. We are talking about the real possibility of parts of megacities like Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai being submerged. And as the sea pushes inland, it poisons freshwater sources and farmland with salt. And all that warm ocean water, it's just fuel, brewing up more powerful and destructive cyclones, especially on India's east coast.
You know, it's easy to talk about all this in terms of the environment, but this goes so far beyond that. The planet's fever translates into a very real and very painful human cost.
This fever is kicking off a massive public health crisis. Brutal, record-breaking heat waves are leading directly to heat stress and death. At the same time, warmer temperatures are creating brand new breeding grounds for mosquitoes, meaning diseases like malaria and dengue are now showing up in the high-altitude Himalayan regions, places where they were literally unheard of before.
And the economic hit from all of this, it is just staggering. One estimate suggests that environmental damage, made worse by climate change, is already costing India around 5.7% of its GDP. Every single year. For a developing economy, that is a massive, constant drain. Which brings us right back to where we started, back to that central idea. Global warming is the fever. Climate change is the huge list of symptoms. And for a country like India, with its specific vulnerabilities, this fever is attacking its most basic functions, the ability to feed its people, to give them clean water, and to keep them healthy.
But that leaves us with one last massive question. A fever, after all, is just a symptom of a deeper illness. We've diagnosed the fever, and we've documented the symptoms. So the real question we have to ask ourselves is, what's the cure?